Welcome to the story and lore video for a newly released Atomic Heart, which was developed by Mundfish. As usual, we will be breaking down the main story of the game and also providing background context from the numerous files that we find throughout the game. On a final note, if you want to see the review of the game, a separate video is up on the channel called Atomic Heart Review. I do also want to mention that due to the fact that majority of the characters within the game have Russian names, there is a very good chance that I might mispronounce a name or two. I want to apologize in advance. Alright, let's jump into it. Our opening scene brings us to a canal in the Soviet Union influenced town named the Vavilov Complex, as we take a nice relaxing ride down the town's canal. We have a small interaction with our glove who is named Charles, or as the glove pronounces it, Charles. We can see very early that this particular world is jointly inhabited by humans and robots alike, robots becoming a very regular and ever part of normal life within the Vavilov Complex. And I mean, they aren't all bad. One even brings us a nice ice-cold soda while we enjoy our boat ride. And if we take a look to our right hand side here, we also see a perfectly normal situation as a citizen is walking their pig. But aside from the pet pig thing, there is another reason I decided to include these particular civilians. The older lady, clearly the mother of the other civilian, is asking her son why his robots are not doing as they're told. The son responds that they've been acting up all day, and the mother proceeds to take control and correct them, essentially setting up in the very first 15 minutes of the game that something unusual is happening with these robots. We receive a call from Dr. Sessionov. He asks us how we're finding the glove, and we mention that it's better than our old one. And we find out that Dr. Sessionov is the one responsible for designing and creating the glove, and asks that we take special care of it, and it's more important than we think. He asks us to meet him at his lab so we can complete our full integration with the glove, since he has a busy day ahead of him with the parade. We're told to speak to Michael Stockhausen for all the details. As we make our way to the laboratory, we have a chance to enjoy some of the parade entertainment, such as robots doing some juggling. Not to mention that this guy is selling a device called the Thought Device. He asks us if we've been polymerized, since without it, the Thought Device won't work as intended. We explain that we are polymerized and mention that these devices weren't meant to be released until Monday. He explains that since we're in military uniform, we're actually cleared to activate our Thought Neuroconnector almost immediately. He says that the Thought Device currently works as a personal telephone and headlight. Now, you can have him try to install it on you, or you could refuse to allow him to do it. In my very first playthrough, I personally chose to refuse, but if you do accept, the Thought Device will essentially not work due to your glove, possibly hinting that the glove acts similarly to the Thought Device. We find a Tereskova, a female robot that we later find out was designed using the appearance of a famous cosmonaut and famous singer. They're common robots for customer service jobs. And this particular Tereskova is selling a freshly printed newspaper. She tells us that the Facility Herald is talking about all the breakthroughs that are currently going on in the USSR. Biology, robotics, gunsmithing, you name it. Just in time for universal polymerization. When asked about the biology breakthrough, she mentions that scientists have developed an experimental vitamin complex that increases the lifespan of Soviet citizens to between 100 and 150 years of age. Robotics believe that within the next 5 years, robots could be completely indistinguishable from humans, that the facial expressions will be so subtle that you could be buying a newspaper and not even know that you're talking to a robot. P3, the code name for our character, responds that he would rather know who he is talking to, giving us our first sign that he might not be very trusting of robots in general. Honestly, it gave me a little bit of an iRobot feel, which I appreciated. Anyway, we pick ourselves up a nice chocolate-coated ice cream as our reward for walking 100 feet and continue on our way towards the laboratory. We hear an announcer mention that Dr. Sessionov will be making a public address in 10 minutes, and we stumble across a war memorial with this bald robot playing the piano. We learn that P3 fought in the war, and when asked by Charles if he remembers anything from it, he mentions that he can't remember anything prior to his injury. He essentially only remembers things from the last 2 years. We arrive at the laboratory and the Tereskova tells us that the polyeducation is a new invention from Dr. Sessionov, a new neuropolymer injection that is encoded with the education that you want, up to a university level curriculum. If you want to learn Korean, simply take the injection. Want a doctorate in nuclear physics? It's only a single injection away with Collective 2.0. Meaning that Soviet citizens no longer need to spend years educating themselves anymore. and they can use that time being more productive members of the motherland. I'm going to stick with the old but reliable proverb of if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. We use a neuropolymer to synchronize the sensors in our gloves with our own neural system before continuing on our way to meet with Dr. Sheshinov. We're able to hear the beginning of his public announcement. He mentions that the USSR are on the brink of the greatest event in the history of mankind, an evolutionary victory that will change the world as we know it. They'll be launching a worldwide version of Collective 2.0 network. This will allow humans to be able to control robots using only their thoughts, and with this to be able to completely forego unskilled labor to the robots and dedicate ourselves to science, no longer needing control panels, loudspeakers, documents, electronic notebooks. Instead, all of this will be transferred purely by thought. It's essentially communism but for thinking. And the device that will allow you to connect to the collective is the thought device, completely free of charge. We also hear from Stockhausen as he mentions that a car is waiting for us, but we need to go and retrieve the access code from Dr. Sheshinov's office and his bodyguards. And when we arrive, wowee! Whichever interior designer that recommended the plane crash aesthetic deserves a raise, let me tell you. We get our very first glimpse of the twins, the bodyguards of Dr. Sheshinov, and if Twitter is anything to believe, the internet's brand new gaming waifus. We retrieve the key and head back downstairs to the vehicle. Sheshinov calls and apologizes that he couldn't meet in person since journalists have been hounding him all day. He tells us that he has been creating humanity's dream, and there are people out there that will be looking to destroy this dream, and that's where P3 comes in, to deal with those people. He tells us that the car will take us to the Vavilov Complex. When we arrive at our flying car, I must say that I didn't expect this type of flying car. I feel like there would be some serious health and safety regulations that would have been broken with this style of transportation. Stockhausen calls us and informs us that Dr. Sheshinov has filled us in, and we don't treat him all that nicely on the phone, which causes Charles to ask why P3 treats him that way. He essentially mentions that he doesn't respect brown noses, and that Dr. Sheshinov has his respect purely due to the fact that he saved his life on the operating table. While all of this dialogue is taking place, we can also see that the city that we were just in is actually a gigantic flying city, completely reliant on technology. Now, Atomic Heart is heavily influenced by Bioshock, so this gives off real sort of Bioshock Infinite vibes, which is pretty cool. As we head down towards our destination, we can see that it is completely autonomous facilities that create, design and deliver goods for people, as well as statues of prominent figures completely created by robotic artists, all under Collective. One of the robots flying past is named Adrofa, begins initiating combat maneuvers and shoots our car out of the sky. Thankfully, we were lucky enough to land inside the Vavilov Complex through its window. The Tereskova helps us out the car and explains that all the other robots were carrying about their normal operations until they suddenly became hostile. We get back into the air, only for us to lose our one and only friend and end up crashing back into the ground for, the second time in 60 seconds. We wake up to a full-blown robot apocalypse and call Dr. Sheshinov. We explain that there are bodies and damage everywhere at the complex, and whatever is happening to the robots has clearly been going on for a while now. Sheshinov says that this is all due to a person by the name of Viktor Petrov, that he is a traitor who hacked the Collective Central Hub and caused civilian robots to attack facility employees. And since Petrov has access codes to the Central Hub, we need to find him and bring him back to the Doctor alive. We asked Charles to give us more information on the target, and he mentions that Viktor Petrov is the lead engineer behind Collective 2.0. He was arrested for treason and ultimately sentenced to community service at the Vavilov Complex. He says that Petrov is likely in the underground levels of the complex and we need to start heading there. We begin to realize that P3 might be lactose intolerant and that the ice cream we ate earlier is starting to give us the runs. We head to the outhouse and find a robot that looks like he's recovering from a big night out on the town, and true to real life, he begins to attack us. He tries to push us into literal crap before beating the proverbial crap out of us like he's Bruce Lee. Thankfully, a nearby grandmother finds us and helps us out. She introduces herself as Granny Zina and tells us that robots have begun attacking people and anyone that doesn't hide is dead. We get spotted and Granny Zina tells us to turn the key clockwise slowly to open up the underground facility, and she reveals that she's been packing some serious heat. She buys us enough time as we head down using the slightly dangerous elevator. We now get into the part of the game which is very gameplay heavy. I will be cutting back and forth between interesting and vital story points that come up, but you have to understand, we might be going through large amounts of the games or areas very quickly. We find our first living survivor, and he doesn't stay living for very long. We find some files that show Director Stockhausen informing all employees of Facility 2826 are required to undergo polymerization on June 10, 1955. Another is a note from Smirnov mentioning an evaluation of our target Viktor Petrov. He mentions that he is nervous and impulsive, and that working at the Plitzakaya Theatre has negatively impacted his psychological state. He's been obsessed with theatrical images and recites poems in his sleep. The psychologist believes that there's no objective causes for his psychopathy or obsession, and believes that this is something more to the theatre than just his workplace. He suggests sending a team to investigate. Granny Zita is also mentioned in a security email, telling employees that Zenyatta Muriova, aka Granny Zina, is not allowed in or around the sapling warehouse without authorization. She's been previously taken seeds and saplings for experimental flowers back to her house under the pretext of performing an inspection. They deem this very dangerous. Finally, there is an order about an incident in the germination workshop that requires the hospital to be cordoned off and inform Dr. Sheshinov immediately. We ask Charles how Petrov managed to hack Collective. He says that he was working with others, all of these people already being eliminated, but since Petrov is a bit more of a slippery customer, that's where we come in. He goes on to explain that Petrov didn't exactly hack Collective. He introduced a false combat mode into the algorithm that caused the central hub to view all humans as invading soldiers. And while the Collective scientists can fix the issue, it will take some time. And in that time, many people will die and information about the incident might reach the public or even worse, other countries. And we ultimately cannot risk the reputation of the country. We get a very unwelcome visit by a giant worm robot that causes major damage to the building and us. We wake up to a woman asking if we're alright, and we say that we are. She asks us for our help since this guy is certainly not alright. She mentions that these guys saved us after the worm attack and tells us that her name is Larissa, and she is also in possession of a neuropolymer capsule. We decide, you know what, screw this guy and quickly use it before she can tell us that we can't. That's when the assassin robot comes in and completely ruins this dude's day. After some walking, we hear some singing coming from across a room. When we enter the room, we don't see anyone until we realize that it's actually a frickin' refrigerator that was singing. Now, this robot is named Nora, and she is a weapons upgrade unit that is incredibly sexual and has innuendos for days. We manage to stop her and proceed onwards. We speak to Charles about the idea of this robot malfunction getting out to other countries and what that would mean. He says that Soviet Union's reputation would suffer and that the Soviet robots are considered perfectly safe and reliable all over the world. It's why Petrov's treason was so bad. He was literally stabbing his own country in the back. He wants the entire world to stop using the Soviet Union's robots. We also learn about the incident in the germination workshop. Apparently, a plant grabbed a student who was training there. While she was rescued, she was in a critical condition as a result of the injuries. Burns that completely covered her entire body and is currently in a state of anaphylactic shock. All witnesses were told to sign NDA agreements just to make sure to keep everything hush-hush, and we find a dead person on the ground with a thought device on. They begin to speak to us, which is, obviously quite strange since they're, dead. It turns out that the neuropolymer memory can also store a person's last thoughts, allowing the dead individual to speak for a few days after they died. But as time does go on, the information becomes corrupted. We find some more files that speak of a newly assigned doctor who has been increasing the frequency of her visits to Petrov, sometimes even ignoring other prisoners. The facility increased surveillance on Petrov due to this. Not to mention a full psychological report for Viktor Petrov, giving him the following diagnoses: pronounced narcissism, major depression based on developed inferiority complex, jealousy based on ego hypercompensation and obsession with theatrical imagery and a yearning for recognition. In other words, this dude's a mess. As we continue through the complex, we finally reach Petrov, speaking to a woman over the radio. She tells Petrov that, he has to leave right now as there is an armed man wearing a polymer glove that is coming for him. Petrov mentions that it has to be Sheshanov's guy, and it's revealed that the woman on the radio is actually Larissa, the doctor that helped us before. He asks Larissa why she spoke to us, and she tells him that they were attacked by a Burav, and that she didn't know. Larissa is also likely the same doctor that was being monitored for her increased visits to Petrov while the prisoner was at the facility. A real sort of Joker and Harley Quinn type of relationship. We approach Petrov and we actually learn the name of our protagonist, Nechayev. Petrov uses a code word to get some of the robots to attack us while he makes an escape. We find out that while searching for Petrov that he is also the one responsible for Nora's personality issue, the overly sexual weapons vendor from before. He hacked Nora due to the fact that he knew that once he turned the robots against the people and the soldiers, they would require more weapons and upgrades to, well, their weapons. And he decided that hacking the vendor for the weapons would become a big priority, causing Nora to become murderous to humans that come in contact with her and for whatever reason, incredibly vulgar. We end up finding a body in the corner near a loader bot. Our biometric scanner confirms that this is indeed Petrov and was likely killed by his own robot. Nechayev gives Sheshanov a call and informs him of the status of Petrov. Sheshanov is disappointed since Petrov's head contained valuable information that he could use to end this crisis quickly. He asks if Petrov had any golden rings on his person, and we tell him that he didn't, and he tells Nechayev to report to the VDNH immediately. As we leave, we realize that we need to activate a birch tree to provide enough power to open up the main gate out of here, requiring us to go and collect 4 canisters from different workshops within the facility. Our very first stop is the algae workshop. Once we get in there, we can see reanimated corpses walking around with flower heads. It is very Last of Us 2.0. Charles believes that dead soldiers have been infected by sprouts, likely something that went wrong with the sprouts after Petrov caused the malfunction. We manage to get the algae container and head towards the Holt workshop. During this time, Charles asks why Nechayev is getting angry so easily. He explains that he's disappointed in himself for letting Sheshanov down. Charles thinks that this is ridiculous, since it wasn't his fault that Petrov died. He goes on to say that Sheshanov is always disappointed in everybody. Since his perfectionism is pathological, every single person in his life lets him down, so there is literally no reason to feel bad about it. I must say I found this an odd thing to come from a glove that was literally created by Sheshanov, but we will learn more about this later. We get a call from Stockhausen, who asks if we've located Petrov's girlfriend, Dr. Larissa Filatova. He mentions that she must not be hurt under any circumstances. If she is threatened, we must come to her defense. He goes on to say that Petrov used it without her knowledge and that she had no idea of his true intentions, and she'll be trialed in the court of law. Once the call ends, Charles mentions that Larissa Filatova has actually worked with Dr. Sheshanov for many years, and even the fact that she was part of the most crucial aspects of Collective 2.0 since she replaced the late Chariton Zakharov in that role. Nechayev asks who Zakharov was, and Charles mentions that he was an esteemed neurosurgeon and one of the few scientists that destroyed the Brown Plague. Zakharov was Sheshanov's closest friend and trusted colleague. Larissa Filatova was Zakharov's student and assistant. She continued the professor's work after he died, but is now considered a traitor to the motherland. Within the facility, we find different experiments that are all done to test plants and polymers for intergalactic travel. Heat polymer and cold polymer are just a few examples that are needed to handle temperatures on Venus and Mars respectively. Plants, animals, and algae are all specifically crafted to be able to handle the harsher conditions of foreign planets. As we walk into the pesticide workshop, we're greeted with a gun pointed straight at our head by a scientist. Thankfully, due to our training, we disarm him quickly, but he goes on to say that we cannot wake up the plant and need to bring polymer to the plant in order to blow it up. If we do this, he will give us the container that we need. In the meantime, he is pumping the plant with a chemical that will keep it dormant for the moment, but mentions that he's almost out of the chemical and that we need to hurry. An exorbitant amount of puzzles later, we send the polymer canister to the mutant plant, and we reward ourselves with a bit of the Cuban's finest. The scientist uses the cigar to ignite the polymer and begins to burn the creature, but not before it pulls out the old Uno reverse card. I mean, I don't think a single person expected the scientist to survive, but I must admit it was a pretty gnarly way to go. We retrieve all the canisters and make our way out of the facility. While in the elevator, we ask Charles how Zakharov died. He tells us that Sheshinov is the only person that knows the details, but is considered mysterious circumstances. The story that Sheshinov has said was that Zakharov slipped and fell into a lab bath full of hazardous and experimental neuropolymer. But some people were puzzled by some of the aspects of the story. No footage of the moment was recovered, even though the labs are monitored at all times. And also the fact that the polymer in question isn't even hazardous at all. There isn't any way for it to actually kill a person. In fact, it's the same polymer that we've been swimming around in moments throughout the game. We finally reached the top and are now in the local village. It has, however, been completely overrun by murderous robots that want to murder us specifically. We find out that the Tereshkovas, the woman robot that tried to sell us the newspaper, and also the other one that tried to help us when we initially landed in the facility, operate autonomously and are not connected to the network. This essentially means that they're not controlled by Petrov. We also get a phone call from Granny Zina asking what we thought of the whole cute little bush that they have down there, meaning that she has knowledge of the gigantic creature that we just blew up. She asked us to meet with her, but when we do arrive at the location, I think she forgot to mention that we were going to be greeted by this chonky boy. However, it turns out that Granny's house actually flies and manages to save the day once again. She asks us to sit and watch the television. It shows Sheshinov speaking with a man named Molotov in regards to the robot malfunction. Sheshinov assures Molotov that the malfunction has been corrected and that there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Molotov believes it's only a matter of time until the United States finds out about the incident and that this could be an international scandal. This could literally jeopardize the Atomic Heart project. Sheshinov reminds Molotov that the Atomic project was actually his own, something that he started after the war but everybody refused to acknowledge. Molotov mentions that this is not going to change the fact that they are being smothered by Western sanctions. Sheshinov thinks that it's only a matter of time before the full polymerization of the Soviet citizens, the collective network, and the Atomic Heart project will help turn the tides. Molotov disagrees and states that if the Americans find out that the robots can be switched to combat mode, then the entire project will be completely dead in the water. Molotov explains that the Politburo has decided that they will be having a special commission investigating the robot's malfunctions, and will be at Sheshinov's facility later that same day. She tells him it's a direct connection, and not his business to know. Before we leave, we also find out that Granny Zina knows that we were meeting with Stockhausen, and she is literally like the apocalypse version of the CIA. We reach the train station, and we speak to a robot named Rafik that makes our life 1,000 times harder by not accepting any of the train passes that we give him, but thankfully we do eventually get permission to ride on the train. We ride this train for maybe, 30 seconds before it gets derailed, and we almost die again. Luckily for us, we find Stockhausen, who is completely terrified but gives us the debrief. He tells us that Molotov is on his way back to the VDNH, and that Sheshinov wants us to go there right away and initiate the emergency drill. We reach the exhibition, and Charles mentions that there will be a huge celebration on Monday in honor of the national polymerization and the launch of Collective 2.0. All the highest ranking members of the Communist Party will be there. Nechayev mentions that he'll be able to fix everything by then. He asks Charles what Molotov has against Sheshinov, since the commission is happening just 2 days prior to the launch of Collective. Charles thinks that it's precisely due to the fact that it's almost ready. Molotov likely wants to get credit for Collective 2.0, and the malfunction Petrov caused is an excellent pretext to show that Dr. Sheshinov is not capable of overseeing the project and by extension the polymerization of the Soviet Union. Nechayev and Charles begin to argue about the fact that neither Molotov nor Sheshinov actually care about the victims of this. Nechayev thinks that since Sheshinov sent him to deal with the problem, then that ultimately means that he does care, while Charles believes that both Molotov and Sheshinov have something to gain in preventing information about the malfunction from reaching the rest of the world. Since nobody would believe that a small group of traitors is responsible for the entire thing, immediately thinking that the Soviet robots are probably dangerous, ultimately leading to the conclusion that Sheshinov and Molotov should have vested interest in ending the malfunction as quickly as humanly possible. Yet, even with all that in mind, neither of them have gone to the government to have troops sent to the facility and deal with hostile robots, arrest Petrov, or end it in any other way. Sheshinov is doing everything that he can to conceal the malfunction from everybody, including the government. Nechayev thinks that they can't send the army in because there are too many people. It's highly likely that a single soldier could leak intel to another country, which would simply end it all. But Charles reminds him that Sechenov could just simply send in the Argentum unit, a group of soldiers loyal to Sechenov and his personal militia. They are perfectly capable of eliminating the robots while having no chance of a leak to the outside countries. But Sechenov cannot deploy troops without the authorization of the Politburo, and that means that Molotov wants to lead the collective. Nechayev fails to understand how any one person can lead the collective, since it's actually meant to be shared by everyone. I mean, it's false communism, essentially. Charles says that certain leaders of the military and government officials will have higher access and permissions to collective than the average civilian, and that there will be a single alpha connector that will be in charge of absolutely everything. Now, that alpha connector is currently in the possession of Sechenov, but Molotov wants that alpha connector. We reach the main lobby and are greeted by a Tereskova that tells us that the code will require us to help her repair another Tereskova, as it requires two to activate the code. We speak to Charles later about the fact that we have actually never noticed a bracelet on Sechenov, and if his alpha connector looks different. Charles says that his device is completely unique, and its shape and location are one of the biggest secrets that he has. He thinks that it's guarded by his personal bodyguards, the twins. Nechayev mentions how the twins are so graceful and elegant, and that in fact they actually remind him of something. When asked of what they remind him of, he says that he doesn't actually know, but he knows that it's something good. We manage to retrieve all the Tereskova parts, and they initiate the code just in time for Molotov's arrival. Molotov goes on to address Sechenov and mentions how the malfunction is a complete worldwide catastrophe due to the robot's combat mode and countless human casualties. The combat mode is information that Molotov should not know, so Sechenov asks Molotov where he came to have this information. He says that he was told by Viktor Petrov, a trusted ally of the Soviet Union. Sechenov mentions that actually in fact he's now a prisoner that has been found guilty, in the words of a traitor, has no merit. Molotov explains that this was actually Sechenov's personal order, and is in direct violation of Soviet law. He says that the launch of Collective 2.0 will now be cancelled, and Sechenov will be subject to a full-fledged investigation. This causes Sechenov to ask Molotov for a personal meeting, which he agrees to and leaves to arrive here at the facility. It's at this moment that Nechayev begins to hallucinate. And I kid you not when I explain this to you, because this is actually what happens. You become a white dog that has a ball for a head. Everything is cartoony, and you run around collecting apples. To say that I was completely lost during this moment in the game would be an understatement. But it does make more sense later, sort of, barely. When Nechayev awakes, we see that Sechenov has actually arrived. Stockhausen mentions that everybody is dead, including Molotov. Nechayev is confused about what happened and asks how everybody is dead. Sechenov responds, saying that the robots must have got in and that he's lucky to be alive. He tells the Right to handle the body of Molotov. If you're curious at all of who the hell is Right, the name of the twin bodyguards are literally Right and Left. Sechenov mentions that he will inform the Kremlin of Molotov's death and that the Collective 2.0 must continue its launch. This is where we get an unusual, but I must admit pretty cool cinematic of the twins, as one pierces the stomach of the other. Wright takes out a golden object that turns into a key, and they begin to use that on the bath nearby. This causes the bath to fill with a blood-like substance that forms into the shape of a human. It approaches the body of Molotov and begins to infuse with him. Look, this crap is weird as hell, but I promise you that we will find out everything about it. As the blood subsides from the pool, we can see that Molotov's remains have turned completely skeletal. Stockhausen returns to the room and explains that somebody was caught on the central hub broadcasting, essentially attempting to send information to the west. Sechenov asked who could have done it, and Stockhausen mentions that there are only two people that are able to do it, Sechenov himself or Petrov. But Nechayev reaffirms that Petrov is dead. We saw his body with our own two eyes. Sechenov says that we only saw the body, and that Petrov is the first and foremost a head, mentioning that with Dr. Filatova as his accomplice and a neurosurgeon of her caliber, anything is possible. We're told to go into the scientific facility where the signal was being traced in order to find and capture Petrov. We ask Charles what happened down in the room with the government commission. Since we lost consciousness, he was also disabled at the same time. We ask about the red monster from the bathtub. Charles states that it was actually a neuropolymer data storage, and that Dr. Zakharov died the exact same way. Nechayev wonders why it was in the shape of a person. Charles says that it was Seshenov's idea and he wanted it to move more independently. It's pretty much as loyal to Seshenov as the ballerina twins. While it walks around on the outside world, it will stay close to Seshenov as an additional security measure. This ultimately means that this red jelly man is capable of sneaking up behind a person, murdering them, and then leaving no trace. Charles points out that the odd similarities to a particular doctor named Zakharov that died under similar strange circumstances. We manage to find both Petrov and Filatova in the scientific center, but are ambushed by a robot and ultimately knocked the hell out. When Nechayev awakes, we see that Filatova is trying to help him while Petrov tells her to let him die. Petrov calls Nechayev only by the name of Seshenov's dog, and is deeply concerned that he is already being threatened after waking. Nechayev calls out Petrov on the number of innocent people that have been slaughtered due to his robots, suggesting the number to be in the thousands. This surprises Filatova, since she believed that it was only a local malfunction. Nechayev points out that it's oddly convenient that neither she nor Petrov has a single scratch on them, considering this is literally just apparently a malfunction. Beginning with Vavilov and the VDNH, the robots are attacking everybody except Petrov and Filatova, and that means that Petrov is controlling them. She calls him out on it, and Petrov admits to doing this on purpose. Filatova decides to leave, and Petrov follows after her. We escape and get a call from Petrov asking us to leave him alone, and that after what we told Larissa, she is no longer returning his calls. Thankfully, Charles was able to trace his location, and we find out exactly where he is. This time being the theater. We learn that the theater is one of the most famous in all of the Soviet Union, and that Petrov was responsible for configuring and testing the robots within the theater. He also programmed and studied the interplay of various crafts. Charles believes that you could even say that Collective was born on the stage of this theater. We finally reach the main stage of the theater. Petrov is dancing with the robots and mentions that Larissa dumped him after finding out the truth. He asks about Molotov, and Nechayev tells him that he's dead. He says that the Collective will now launch and will be the end of everything. This annoys Nechayev and yells back at him, but there's nothing wrong with people controlling robots with their minds, and that he was the one responsible for the system in the first place. Petrov says that he has no idea what Seshenov wants, or was planning to do with it. He states that it wasn't him that reprogrammed any robots. It takes an eternity to write a functional algorithm for just a single robot, yet there are dozens out there. He says that the combat mode was programmed from the initial design phase. And while nobody thought that it would actually be activated here in the Soviet Union, which he does take responsibility for, that Seshenov's plans are much worse than this and that they need to be stopped. He goes on to mention that he planned on proposing to her in the theater this day that Collective launched, but now he can't. He throws something at Nechayev and allows himself to be killed by the robot. Afterwards, Nechayev calls Seshenov to inform him that Petrov is dead. He tells him to store his head in a container and to bring it to him. We have a moment not long after this when Nechayev is having a little bit of a breakdown. He feels ashamed because once again he failed his mission. On top of that, he is now carrying around a human head, and Seshenov is completely fine about it. And the fact that Petrov gave him 2 golden rings just before his death grinds his gears. Charles asks why that grinds his gears, and Nechayev says that he actually doesn't know why it does, but it does. As we're driving on our way to Seshenov, Nechayev gets a call from Granny Zina, asking if she heard right and that if we've killed Petrov. He tells her that he is indeed dead, and Granny says that as long as he has his head, then it will all work out. She also asks if Petrov had any golden rings on his possession, which Nechayev lies about and tells her that no, he didn't. We arrive at the facility and Charles asks Nechayev if he believed that civilian robots in combat mode would be able to complete the Atomic Heart project. He thinks that they would be able to do it with little to no issue. If there were bots at all military bases, headquarters and launch sites, there is a very good chance that the American military would be caught by surprise, just like here. Charles mentions that civilian losses would be very high, which Nechayev thinks wouldn't happen since the bots would only be programmed to target military targets. This causes him to realize what the use of the golden rings are. Anybody could take off their thought device and disconnect from Collective, but a bot can't. That means that your robot housekeeper could totally drag you back to Collective whenever it pleases, or is ordered to. The rings are for their own robots, so they can listen to you and nobody else, including the Collective. We arrive at the facility and have numerous dead bodies of the volunteers and neuropolymer created animals that are designed to inhabit future worlds. Not to mention that we also managed to get the head of Petrov to Stockhausen, and he's accompanied by the ballerina twins. Lev takes the head and places it into the device. While this is happening, we see Larissa running to a stop and then throwing a grenade at the ground in front of Stockhausen. It blows up the machine, and the neuropolymer makes its way towards Stockhausen. We see Nechayev begin to fall unconscious as his eyes turn white. We hear the voice of Sechenov asking why he isn't sleeping. Nechayev responds that he can't fall asleep and refuses to take sleeping pills. Sechenov begins to talk about the story of when he was a boy. His brother was scared of the dark, so his mother would leave the light on. It helped his brother, but he personally hated it, stating that the light interfered with his imagination. He didn't like children's books either, for the same reason. There were too many colourful pictures. They weren't real. He much preferred the books in his father's library: history, medicine, theoretical physics. He likes the fact that science doesn't try to make the world prettier, it just simply gives you the facts. He says that he made another discovery. A monster in the dark behaves predictably. It can be studied, while a monster in the light wears a mask and is therefore unpredictable, which makes it dangerous. He proceeds to ask Nechayev if he can turn the light off, to which he responds yes. We walk through this asylum as a teardrop made from polymer is calling for us to find him, addressing Nechayev as my love. When he awakes, he finds Stockhausen scalified from the neuropolymer. Filatova calls Nechayev and apologizes and says that they need to meet. She needs to show him everything with his own two eyes. She states that he trusts Sechenov too much and that he's keeping him in the dark. She will expose the truth. As we continue our way to the secret location in the lighthouse, Charles asks us to dispose the beta connectors, the gold rings. Nechayev proceeds to throw them away in the ocean, and Charles believes that it's probably saved many, many lives. We find a bunch of robots defending the lighthouse, and we get a call from Sechenov, who tells Nechayev that the access codes from Petrov's neuropolymer memory has been extracted, and that Sechenov has now been able to turn off combat mode and return the robots to their normal status. He asks us to meet back up with him, but Nechayev doesn't really want to tell him about the meeting with Filatova. We find her underground, and she asks Nechayev what he believes Sechenov will do with Collective. He tells her that people will be able to control robots with their minds, and will no longer be able to stab each other in the back as a result. Filatova explains that actually, in reality, his plans are much more different. She says that the Collective is not just about controlling robots. Sechenov will be able to control every single person connected to Collective. She proceeds to lead Nechayev to the facility, and he can see for himself. Inside the facility, we see a bunch of boxes that contain people. Filatova explains that these are volunteers who laid the foundation for Collective. The first few groups died. Group 30 went insane, Group 73 opted out, and Group 101 killed each other, while Group 204 was the very first to survive. All of their consciousness is now in an imaginary world that they call Limbo. Their bodies are all here under her complete control. She demonstrates to Nechayev to show that she can make them do whatever she wants. Nechayev can't believe what they've done to these people, while Filatova explains that chemically speaking, they're all completely happy, that this is what Collective is all about. The entire world will end up like this. Nechayev thinks it's ridiculous. Why would Sechenov want to turn everyone into a bunch of idiots? It doesn't make any sense. Filatova mentions that memories, consciousness, behavior, and speech patterns are all preserved, but the only thing that the individual loses is their free will. Nechayev says that this needs to be stopped, and Filatova mentions that this is exactly what Viktor Petrov and her were trying to do before they got hunted down by him, and now it's too late. She reiterates that Sechenov designed Collective to be a mind control system. He has special neurocontrollers and created an entire army of robots that will kill at his very whim. He wants to enslave the entire world. On Monday, when Collective launches, the world ends. Nechayev agrees to help Filatova. He begins having hallucinations with a voice telling him to resist. Filatova tells him that he was crossing into limbo, but normally it can't be stopped, and asks how he's interrupting it. He explains that this big lump of polymer is speaking to him. She explains that it's likely a hallucinatory reaction, a side effect from the surgery, the reaction of a damaged brain to the presence of a neuropolymer implant. This confuses Nechayev, and he asks what she means. She's actually quite surprised by this, the fact that Sessionov hasn't told him yet. He goes on to ask Charles if he knows what's going on. He says that he doesn't, but there is an external data source that is accessing the polymer implant within his head. Filatova asks Nechayev who he is talking to, and mentions that it's his AI glove named Charles. And Charles mentions that the Voskhod polymer extension was developed from data experiments that Dmitry and himself ran. Nechayev asks Charles why he is saying this and who he is. Filatova says that our glove AI named Charles is actually Professor Chariton Zakharov. When asked how, she explains that Zakharov was developing the collective subsystems in the module that is actually inside of his head. Apparently Zakharov ran numerous experiments on himself that were dangerous and unpredictable, which ultimately led to his death. It turns out the Sessionov stashed Zakharov's consciousness in the glove and used the abbreviation Charles as a name. Remember at the very beginning of the game that the glove actually pronounced his name as Charles, not Charles. It's likely that after the accidental death of Zakharov, that Sessionov placed his body within the neuropolymer to create a version of himself that he could install into the glove, a type of AI consciousness. Using this knowledge, we can now access the archive of the laboratory using the details of Zakharov. This will allow us to see the files on Nechayev. We begin with a film that is narrated by Sessionov. He mentions that an event in Bulgaria left the agents badly injured. Two of the agents were so seriously injured that one ended up dying and the other had much of their body amputated and given prosthetics. Nechayev mentions how he already knows that half his body is now prosthetics and that nothing's particularly new here. The next file mentions how they installed a neuropolymer brain function extension to eliminate the destructive impulses triggered by traumatic memories. They mention that the patient is Sergei Nechayev. His code name was Plutonium. They attempted the surgery 3 times, with the first 2 being unsuccessful. Nechayev suffered a severe brain injury in Bulgaria that could not be repaired. The damage was so severe, in fact, that they thought that the patient would need to be euthanized. Due to damage of the frontal lobes, this causes Nechayev to experience bouts of uncontrollable rage, and since he has steel prosthesis, it renders him dangerous to everybody around him. Due to this temporary insanity, he is immersed in a surreal psychedelic reality that prevents him from accepting aggressive behavior. Sessionov mentions that he continues to have severe hallucinations before asking Nechayev if he's seen his wife again. He mentions that the Voskhod implant will give Nechayev artificial memories that will help him overcome the obsession with his deceased wife. Nechayev states that this is just a bunch of lies since he's never been married. Sessionov continues to mention that using the Voskhod, that they can send Nechayev's consciousness into the imaginary world of limbo using a pulse aimed directly at the pituitary gland, causing him to go into combat mode on command. This is referring to the moments when Nechayev was losing consciousness and people around him ended up dead. He adds that he is strongly opposed to it before it cuts off. Filatova mentions that Sessionov can send Nechayev into his own private paradise at the push of a button and then turn him into a murder machine. She goes on to say that the hallucinations are just his brain's way of defense, especially since Sessionov completely wiped out the memory of his wife. We begin to leave the facility as we plan to confront Sessionov. Nechayev begins to call out Charles, or rather Chariton, for knowing about this from the beginning, which she denies. He says that Sessionov murdered him and turned him into a blob of polymer goo. Brainwashed and manipulated Nechayev so he couldn't know who to trust. That's why he pretended to be the AI glove called Charles, or Charles. He needed to know who was who. He goes on to say that they need to stop Sessionov before Monday. Nechayev mentions that they could just notify people not to wear the thought device, but Chariton states that the person can take off the thought device. It would merely prevent them from making a call giving orders to robots. He reveals that it's actually a neuropolymer injection that makes people part of the collective. It embeds itself into the brain and connects itself to the neural network. Once you get the injection, it cannot be undone. You will be stuck in the collective forever. Nechayev goes on to ask if he was actually married and what was her name. Chariton mentions that her name was Ekaterina, that Nechayev and her served in the Argentum unit. Ekaterina, or Katya, as Nechayev called her, was an incredible agent. As a child, she studied ballet and had achievements in both dance and martial arts, revealing that the ballerina twins were actually designed from the skill set and inspiration from Ekaterina. And since Zakharov's consciousness was saved and put into a glove, and his wife's was not, so instead imprinted her personal skills onto his bodyguards. As the elevator closes, Nechayev begins to pass out and drift into limbo, causing Filatova to freak out. When we awake, we hear the news channel speaking about a press conference in which Sechenov completely denied rumors of civilian robot malfunction. It turns out that the news is coming from a radio, as we are now next to Granny Zina. She mentions that Nechayev was a good boy when her daughter was around, but since his accident he's been a bit haywire, revealing that Granny Zina is actually the mother of Ekaterina, and that makes her the stepmother of Nechayev. She mentions that she has been keeping an eye on him ever since the accident. Nechayev remembers Larissa and asks where she is, and Granny Zina mentions that she's gone since he scattered her to the winds. We find out that Charles knew about Granny Zina the whole time and never mentioned anything as Zina begins to beg Nechayev to kill Sechenov. This is where we have two very different deviations in the story. Two endings, essentially. I will continue with what I believe to be the true ending of the story, and then I'll explain what happens if you take the other choice afterwards. So for this one, we will accept and decide to go on to kill Sechenov and save the civilians. We head to the main building and find one of the sisters ready to attack. After defeating her, we have an interesting cutscene that shows Nechayev seeing a bit of his wife in her. On our elevator to the top of the tower, we learn exactly what Operation Atomic Heart is. The goal of Atomic Heart is the complete suppression of the United States of America, the change of political regime, abolishment of capitalism, the establishment of communism, and establishing social and moral ideals consistent with the beliefs of a Soviet person. The process begins with seizure of strategic and military facilities, aided by the infiltration of Soviet civilian robots, followed by the disconnection and shutdown of nuclear power plants, aka the deactivation of the Atomic Heart of America, complete surrender of the government and transfer of power to top leadership of the USSR. The Soviet Union will sell robots and then slowly give them away as aid. Once it reaches a certain mass, they will then take over the power plants and cut off the power. We arrive at the office of Sechenov. Both twins are now present and by his side. Sechenov asks Chariton if he's proud of himself, mentioning how he, Larissa and Zeniada have been busy but didn't expect Nechayev to be so gullible. Nechayev is angry, and he asks if he was just a plaything to Sechenov. He replies saying that he doesn't blame him for being upset, and tells Chariton that he was supposed to help Nechayev, not pull his strings like a puppet. Chariton says that Sechenov can't blame him. Chariton tells Sechenov that you can't blame him. He isn't the one trying to deprive everyone of their free will, turning them into mindless puppets. And it wasn't his idea to be a talking pile of goo either. He feels Sechenov is happy it happened since he can achieve his goal. However, he does feel that Sechenov is happy that it did happen, since now he can achieve his goal. Sechenov responds that he saved Zakharov and Nechayev both, that they're both scientific miracles and that Chariton was his best friend while Nechayev is a son to him. Chariton points out that he probably views the twins as daughters, and all the collective people are just his adopted children. He cannot help but to use people. Sechenov wants to give humanity a spectacular future with unimaginable achievements. Nechayev interrupts him and tells him to give up, and Sechenov orders the twins to kill him. Thus begins the very final boss fight of the game. We initially get our asses beat pretty badly, but manage to get the best of the twins in the end. Nechayev walks around Sechenov and pulls the gun from his hand before shooting him. Sechenov yells that Chariton is manipulating him, as he falls down and says that Chariton has been accessing the Voskhod module in his brain and starting to send Nechayev into limbo. Since Sechenov was so busy with Collective, he didn't actually realize straight away. He says that Chariton killed Molotov, and asks if he used Nechayev to kill Filatova as well. Chariton explains that he did all the dirty work while Sechenov stayed clean, and Sechenov mentions that they didn't need to die. Nechayev attempts to rip the glove from his hand but is electrocuted, which causes him to collapse. Sessionov pleads for Nechayev to get up as the neuropolymer breaks out of the glove. Chariton makes his way through the bathtub as he explains that he wants the human race to realize that it has no future, to step aside and to make way for the next phase of its evolution. Chariton becomes one with the red monster from before. Sessionov calls him pure evil and asks what he plans to do. Chariton explains that evil is an abstract concept, and that humans will soon go extinct, something he realized when he stopped being a human. Chariton proceeds to kill Sessionov, while we see Nechayev slowly dying on the floor before losing consciousness. Chariton begins to destroy the Alpha Connector thought device, bringing an end to the collective forever. We find out in a final scene that Chariton actually went on to consume Sessionov, and leaves no trace of his body behind. Chariton was seen leaving the facility and has since vanished. The final scene shows Nechayev in either limbo or possibly the afterlife with the twins that represented his wife. Thus ends the story of Atomic Heart. However, I did mention earlier that this was only one of two endings. However, before I do go on to the other ending, if you are still watching this video, please put crispy critters into the comments to let me know that you are. I'm genuinely interested. By the way, that's the catchphrase that Nechayev uses throughout the game, and I never really found any information on why he does it, but thank you for getting this far. Now, you might be wondering why this is considered the real ending, or why I considered it the real ending. Well, this ties up much more of the storyline than the other ending, such as the twins, Chariton, and you can hash it out with Sessionov. The other option you have is refusing to confront Sessionov and deciding to stop being a puppet. Nechayev will destroy his glove and Chariton, and then will go on to live on his own. The game ends and you will find out that nobody knows the whereabouts of Nechayev, and Sessionov ultimately goes on to launch Collective. Now, you might think that that is like a better ending in terms of outcome, but Atomic Heart doesn't really have a good ending. Both endings are pretty bad for their own particular reasons. For example, if you choose to leave, then Nechayev will live and Chariton's master plan will fail, but Sessionov will go on to enslave the entire world using his collector program. While if you choose to confront Sessionov, both he and Nechayev will die and Chariton will realize his plan and look to eliminate the human race. But Collective will be destroyed, and humanity at the very least will be able to attempt to fight back using their own free will. Both of these have their ups and downs. I enjoy the story of the game. Not a huge fan of the gameplay, but the story definitely captivated me, and I hope that the video helped you understand and enjoy the story as much as I did. I will also be creating a video in the next few days comparing how Atomic Heart to the Bioshock series, since there were so many overarching similarities between both franchises. So remember to check that out. Another quick little Easter egg that I think I picked up on throughout doing the story and lore video was Chariton's name in particular. It's sort of ironic when you think about Chariton is so close to a charlatan. Charlatan being a fake, much like Chariton's fake AI personality or pretending to be the good guy, having an ulterior motive. Just thought I'd throw that in there as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it to be informative, please hit the like button as it helps out the channel very, very much. And also, please feel free to subscribe for more story and lore videos in the future. Until next time, peace.